Story 1. A large owl standing on the carcass of a buck in the mountains at 3 to 5 a.m. As you approach, all you see are two glowing red orbs. Then, slowly, it becomes a huge dark form standing on the edge of the road with eyes of fire. As you get closer, this massive owl gives you the death stare as you go past. You realize it was just a large owl standing on the remains of fresh roadkill. It freaked me out for the rest of the dark part of the drive. Edit: changed corpse to carcass, because some people can't accept the interchangeability of the English language. Story 2. Someone I knew locally came across a Jeep that had just crashed into the ditch on a highway at night, flipped on its top while still turning kind of thing. He was the first on the scene, so he called 911 and ran down into the ditch. The driver, who was badly mangled, had been tossed from the car and was dying. This guy held him, and the driver died in his arms. The strangest part of it all was that he found out the next day that it was his cousin, but he hadn't been able to recognize him. Story 3. Driving down a two-lane divided highway, I came up to a couple of semi-trucks and went into the left lane to pass. I did a shoulder check to get back into the right lane when I saw headlights in front of me in my lane. The car was going the wrong way. I managed to swerve into the ditch, feeling like I was mere centimeters from death. I thought my wife's scream would be the last thing I ever heard, and I never want to hear it again. The semi-trucks I passed all pulled to the shoulder to check on us. I didn't see the car anywhere. I think they just kept going. I had to pull into a gas station afterward to collect myself. Story 4. I was following a gray Toyota Tundra in a massive blizzard through Montana on McDonald Pass. He was going pretty quickly most of the way, but must have been unfamiliar with how steep the final few miles are. He got away from me as I slowed down to about 35. Not 5 minutes later, I passed his tire marks in the fresh snow that went off the side of the mountain. I pulled over and looked down to see his truck upside down and on fire about 300 yards down. I called emergency services. He didn't die, but was burned up pretty badly. Sad and scary, and don't go 50 in the snow just because you have a truck or four-wheel drive. Story 5. While driving from Morelia to Ciudad Hidalgo, in Mexico, back in the 1980s, we had two ways to get to Ciudad Hidalgo: the National Road or the Old National Road, which was called Mil Cumbres. Mil Cumbres basically means 1,000 curves. That stretch of road literally had 1,000 curves, so a lot of people would get motion sickness when on that road. One evening, on our way back to my grandparents, who lived in Ciudad Hidalgo, my grandfather was driving. He loved taking Mil Cumbres because it had really nice views, and he just really loved driving that road. Since we had the new national road, not a lot of people used Mil Cumbres anymore, so it was kind of desolate with the exception of passing one or two little towns. It was dusk, so soon that meant being on such a desolate road in the mountains, we would be in complete darkness with not many other cars on the same stretch of road. Took 2 hours to get to the town on that road, so maybe 45 minutes into the drive, it had already gotten really dark. As we were driving, my grandfather started slowing down. I was sitting in the back seat because my grandmother was in the front with my grandfather, so I kind of leaned over the front seats to see why he was slowing down. That's when I saw a huge tree log blocking the road. My grandfather came to a stop and immediately started going in reverse to turn around and get out of there immediately. After we turned, my grandfather stepped on the gas pedal, and I was sort of thrown back into the back seat. I immediately turned around to see if I could see anything. As we were speeding away, I could see men very dimly since the light from the taillights of the car was starting to get dimmer and dimmer, coming out from the adjacent trees next to the tree log on the road with flashlights and guns. We were about to get robbed, and thanks to my grandfather's quick thinking and action, we avoided it. That was the last time I was ever on that road. Story 6. I had just finished driving for Uber and was driving down the access road to my home around 3 a.m. when I saw a body lying completely lifeless next to one of those motorized scooters. I pulled over and flagged down his friends who were drunk and kept going without realizing their friend was lying on the ground. The ambulance arrived and took the kid away, but I never found out if he made it. Forget those scooters, man. Story 7. I was on Interstate 70 in Colorado going towards Utah and pulled over at a gas station at 8 p.m. While fueling up, I noticed a couple of attractive women pumping gas. On the other side of the pump was a man in his late 40s, just staring at these young women without noticing anything else going on around him. I walked inside to grab some food for the next few hours of driving. When I came out, I saw that both the younger women's car and the older man's truck were gone. I decided to hang out at the gas station for the next hour to catch a little sleep before hitting the road again. After driving for a few hours, I was speeding heavily. I pulled over at another gas station. The young women were there, getting gas and eating some food at a picnic table. It looked like they had been there for a while. I didn't see any sign of the man in the truck, but can't say I was looking very hard for it. Well, here is where it got creepy as hell. Can't say I didn't stare at them a bit. I mean, they were good-looking women. As I was watching them leave, I saw headlights turn on in the next parking lot, and it was the same man as before. He left when the women left once again. Okay, that's a bit weird, but could just be a coincidence, as there weren't many places to pull over. I left a few minutes later and caught up to them. Now, this guy was riding their bumper with his high beams on. I decided to slow down and stay a distance behind the truck. 10 minutes or so later, the women pulled over once again, most likely to get this guy off their tail. With a sigh of relief, the truck kept going and I continued on my way. About 1 mile down the road, the guy just pulled off to the side of the highway. So I pulled off a mile or so down the road again. Sure enough, the women drove by and the guy was still following them. At this point, we were out in the middle of nowhere and too many coincidences had happened. I called the cops to alert them, and about 15 minutes later, the cops pulled the guy over. I could have just seen too many horror movies that started like this and overreacted, but you never know. Better safe than sorry. Story 8. Not me, but a friend. After dropping me off at my house around 2 a.m., my friend calls me and tells me to lock my doors. He said he saw a man standing in the middle of the road and that as he passed him, the man kept staring through him. Not at him really, but like there was something behind him in his back seat. He also said he could barely make out anything about the man other than his large eyes and trench coat. What really terrified me is that this happened on a street that only my family lives on, and no one would have been out that night. Also, we're a solid 1.5 miles from the nearest neighbor. Freaked me the hell out. Story 9. I slammed the brakes once because I saw a deer in my peripheral vision. Upon closer inspection, it was a mounted deer head on a stick in the middle of the woods. Slammed the gas after I realized that. Story 10. I used to deliver pizza and often had deliveries right at midnight when we closed. One time, late at night, I was driving back to the store through a small neighborhood. Up ahead, I saw something. It was a perfectly spherical, bright, shiny thing, just hovering about 6 feet off the ground. Not moving at all. I pulled up very slowly. Still didn't move. I still couldn't comprehend what I was looking at. Just this shiny hovering orb in the road at midnight. At this point, my curiosity had overridden my fear. I was the guy in the horror movie who dies first because I just had to know. Either I die or I get a cool story, right? So I hopped out of the car and slowly walked up to it. I was right in front of it and still couldn't understand what I was seeing. So I reached out and touched it. It was a balloon, one of those foil birthday balloons with the streetlights shining on it, making it look weird out of context in the middle of the night on an empty road. Story 11. Dad was driving at night, and I was looking out the window and saw 2 red pinpricks in the cornfield, and it followed us. I told my dad about it, and he said, in the most calm, casual tone for this situation, "Those are cornfield demons. Stay in the car and you'll be okay." I started freaking out when he got out of the car not too long after to check a tire before getting back in. I'm still not sure if that was an actual thing or if he was using the situation to his advantage to teach me not to do anything foolish like that at night. Either way, it worked, and I still have no idea what those 2 pinpricks were. Edit. Because you guys have no idea what a pinprick is and cannot gather context from the rest of the passage. Story 12. This is a story about something that was really scary at the time, but kind of funny in retrospect. Once I was driving through an unfamiliar stretch of desert and mountains on my way to a campground in Utah. The sun had set and it was pitch black outside. We hadn't seen a town for a long time, which was fine because we didn't need fuel, but it's worth noting here that before it had gotten dark, the last several exits that had been marked on the map didn't appear to have any people at them. There weren't many other cars on the road that we could see, but eventually this vehicle came up behind me, clearly going much faster than I was. He passed me on the left, and as he went around me, I could see that it was a pickup truck with a lift kit. The pickup got back into my lane in front of me. He stayed there for a few seconds, then suddenly swerved to the left and slammed on his brakes. He then cut back over into my lane, so he was behind me and switched on his bright headlights. He followed me like this for some time, getting right on my rear and flashing his lights repeatedly. I started getting nervous at this bizarre and aggressive behavior. I told my wife to help me find a populated exit. The road began to spiral down a steep mountainous slope. What followed next was a progression of increasingly alarming road signs that seemed like they belonged in a Looney Tunes cartoon where a character is about to careen off a cliff. These signs said things like, "Watch for wildlife," "Frequent wildlife crossing," "Next 20 miles," "Watch for ice," "Watch for falling rock," etc. None of them would have been scary on their own or maybe in the daylight, but at night, in a situation where I was starting to panic, they seemed alarming, and it seemed like they were ridiculously increasing in severity. At one point, a sign popped up that said "road damage." Since I was in panic mode, I remember exclaiming, "Why don't they just fix the damage instead of putting up a sign?" Eventually, we found a town with lots of lights, and I promptly exited. I was terrified the guy would follow us, but he went on past me. I pulled into a gas station, and that's when I figured out what I probably should have realized a long time before. I had my bright headlights on. Story 13. Scariest and funniest at the same time. I was working at a restaurant as a cook. We did the full menu until 11 p.m., then appetizers and burgers until 1 a.m. I tended to pull the solo night shift because I would walk out the door at 1:05 a.m. and the kitchen was stocked, clean, and perfect. It was a long night. The stupid front of house kept sending back food orders after 1 a.m. I didn't leave until 2 a.m., a 30-minute drive home, and I was exceptionally tired. I lived in the boonies of Wisconsin at the time, a good 5 kilometers outside of town, which had 500 people, 2 churches, and 9 bars. I hit the little 24/7 truck stop just at the edge of that town for some munchies and smokes and made the final trek home. Encountering deer was not uncommon out there, so I was going slow. What appeared before me, to my tired eyes, was a monster. It had a huge round body, a crazy long neck, a pointy head, and only 2 legs, right in the middle of the road. It scared the ever-loving hell out of me in that state. Thankfully, it stood there for a second. My brain re-engaged. It's an ostrich. Okay, not a monster, just... And what is an ostrich doing wandering around in central Wisconsin? I looked at it, and it looked at me. I blinked. Nope, still there. Pretty sure it's real. Finally, it trundled off into the forest. What? I grabbed my cell phone and called the tiny little police station in town, non-emergency number. So, I'm really tired, so please laugh at me and tell me to go home and sleep and ignore the call. But I'm pretty sure I just saw an ostrich on highway so just outside of town. She started laughing hysterically, then assured me that, *no, I'm not hallucinating. There's an ostrich and emu farm on the other side of town. The guy raises them for the kitchens in town for meat. Some drunk driver felt that turns are for cowards. Went up, over the berm, through the fence, and through most of the barn. There are still 4 animals, including the one I just spotted, unaccounted for. Where are you exactly, and which way did it go so we can round it up? I gave her the information, finished the last few miles home, and dropped into bed. Wild night. Story 14. A dead, butchered horse was laying in the road. Someone had completely skinned and butchered a horse, taken the choice pieces of meat, and just dumped it on the highway. I almost crashed into it. Story 15. I was fetching someone from his workplace. I had to go through some fields, and some parts of the road were dark. I saw a thin, long object wiggling in an upright position at the side of the road in front of me. Totally freaked me out. I thought I was finally experiencing something extraordinary. As I got closer, I realized it was the tail of a cow. It must have escaped from some field and was hanging around at the side of the road. The cow itself was black, with the tail slightly lighter in color. That's why I only saw the tail moving first without seeing the whole cow first. Story 16. A lonely abandoned shack with a bunch of arrows pointing to it saying, "Come in." Edit. To answer some questions, I was on my way to Texas to see family, and the GPS took us down a back road. My mom and I joked that it was a sex dungeon. Story 17. 3 in the morning on a lonely road, and I was the passenger. An old man wearing a bra, panties, and high heels was casually walking down the road. My friend who was driving didn't believe me and went back around. Sure enough, he saw him and we were like, "What the heck?"